The coffee hills woke before the village did. Even in the blue hush of Asubuhi, dew balanced on the glossy leaves like 1,000 tiny lanterns. Neema swung her woven basket over one shoulder and climbed the narrow path that cut across the terraces, her breath making small clouds in the chill. She could already hear the soft clink of cherries dropping into a tin. Juma was here as always, beating the dawn by a few heartbeats. He stood between two trees, a bandana tied at his brow, fingers moving with an easy rhythm. "Pole pole mrembo," he teased when she slipped on a wet root. She laughed and steadied herself against his arm longer than she needed, feeling the quiet heat of him under the morning cool. They worked side by side, careful hands pinching only the ripe, blood-red cherries. The hills smelled of leaf and damp soil, a dark perfume that had witnessed every version of them. Children racing with green stains on their knees, teenagers pretending to argue while counting the same branch twice just to keep standing shoulder to shoulder. Now they were 20, old enough to carry family worries but young enough to still believe that love might be stronger than ledgers and land papers. A sunray broke through the clouds and painted Juma's cheekbone with gold. "You're glowing," Neema said, and he grinned, reaching to pluck a cherry near her ear, his thumb brushing her skin as if by accident, though both of them knew better. By mid-morning the baskets were heavy. They set them down and shared maize cakes wrapped in cloth, a bottle of sweet chai between them. The warmth of the tea lingered on Neema's lips. When Juma handed her the cup, his fingers touched her mouth. It was small, almost nothing, and yet the hillside changed. The trees seemed to lean closer, the breeze to hush. "If we keep picking like this," he murmured, "Mama will have to make an extra pot of kahawa to keep me from falling asleep in class." She tilted her head. "Or I will have to sit next to you and poke you with a pen." He caught the pen from behind her ear and tucked it into her pocket himself, slow enough to say what words didn't. They didn't kiss, just sat with their shoulders pressed, the small pressure a kind of promise. On the way down, word found them, whispered first by the old men at the dukkha, then spoken plain by Juma's uncle. The debts had ripened along with the cherries. The price of fertilizer, the sick calf, the school fees his little sister would need, all of it had sharpened into a single question the elders were beginning to answer. The land could be sold. A portion, they said. Just enough, they said. "It's talk," Juma told Neema, jaw set tight. "People talk when the sun is low and fear is high." But his eyes kept climbing the slopes as if counting the trees one by one, memorizing them in case memory had to become a kind of ownership. That evening they sat on a boulder above the washing stream. Lanterns came alive in the valley, flickers of domestic constellations. Neema rested her head against Juma's shoulder while he described the fieldwork lab they would have next week, the spectrometer he wanted to build from scrap parts, the coffee roasting experiment he'd begged their teacher to let them try. His words were all brightness, his hands were not. They were restless, tracing the edge of the boulder, then her wrist, then the place on her palm where fortune lines crossed like tiny footpaths. She turned her hand and let his fingers travel, slow and unsure and wanting. The world narrowed to touch and breath and the shared rhythm of their chests. It was enough, not a storm but a steady rain. When they finally stood, stars had pooled over the hills. Neema pressed her forehead to his, a brief, warm contact that carried heat through bone. "We will fight," she said. "We will study, we will find a way that does not turn our mornings into someone else's memories." He nodded and closed his eyes. Their lips met, careful at first, then deepening like a secret entrusted to night. It was a kiss that asked permission of the wind and the trees and received it. No more, no less, a seal placed on their dawns. When they parted, the stream kept talking to stones. "Kesho," he whispered. "Tomorrow." She stepped away, already missing the press of him, but holding his warmth between her ribs like a smoldering ember as she walked home under the singing crickets. The talk found a table. Juma's father spread the notebook on the mat, pages furred with numbers. The paraffin lamp drew a circle of amber around them while the walls held back the night. "We cannot drink pride when the harvest runs lean," Baba said, not unkindly. "We cannot brew kahawa from promises." Juma kept his eyes on the figures, columns that should have equaled hope and instead balanced against debt. There was a way through, he argued. Renegotiate, sell the calves new offspring later, take an advance against the co-op payout. But every path drew a loop that ran back to the word land. Neema sat with her mother at home, pretending to mend trousers while her mind crossed the hills to the lamplight at Juma's house. Mama threaded the needle and asked, too casually, "When he looks at you, does he see the hills or do you see them for him?" Neema smiled at the floor. "We see the same thing, I think. We see mornings that belong to us." Mama nodded. "Then guard them. Not with fists, Binti, but with smartness. She told Neema about a woman at the market who knew a cousin who worked with a microfinance group in town. They like young people who can show a plan and keep a ledger straighter than a gossip's tongue. At school the next day, the chalkboard held equations about rates and slopes, as if the universe had decided to tutor them privately. During lunch, Juma and Neema claimed a corner of the library, heads close over a scrap paper budget. Their knees touched under the table, the unremarkable friction grounding them as they mapped ideas. A small roasting venture for the co-op's rejects. A weekend tutoring circle for primary kids whose parents would pay with labor during harvest. A social media page to sell microlots to tourists in Moshi. Every time Juma laughed, low and soft, it loosened the tightness in Neema's chest. Every time Neema leaned in to point something out, her hair brushed his jaw and set the air humming. After school they returned to the hill path, slower now, as if leaving footprints they could double back to if the future grew strange. They picked only a little, enough to feel honest, not so much that fatigue would steal the night. When the sun finally collapsed into a violet band, they stole away to the old picker's shed. Weathered boards, the smell of burlap and rain. Juma set the lamp on a crate. Neema shut the door against the breeze. The room contracted to a pulse. They stood facing each other, not touching yet, the space between them a live wire. "We should study," Neema said, not moving. "We should," he agreed, taking a half-step closer. The lamp burned steady. They reached at the same time, laughter breaking the tension, and then their mouths found each other like long-lost travelers. It was not hurried. Their kisses were a conversation, questions asked in the language of breath and answered with the press of lips, the gentle wander of hands over shoulders, the learning of new constellations mapped in skin through fabric. When Neema shivered, Juma's hands slowed, asking without words. She answered with a nod and a firmer grip at his back. The lamp hissed. The rain began, tapping the roof like a drumline softening to a lullaby. They kept the line between them respectful where it needed to be, generous where it could be, exploring edges and pauses, choosing tenderness over urgency. When they finally leaned against the same crate, foreheads touching, their chests rose and fell together. The world beyond the shed was still there, ledgers, fathers, the price of fertilizer. But inside this circle of light they sketched another kind of arithmetic. One mouth plus another equals enough. "Tomorrow we talk to the microfinance woman," Neema said, voice hushed as if plans could spook. "Tomorrow we ask the co-op manager about small roasts," Juma echoed. They blew out the lamp and stood in darkness long enough for the night to learn their shape. Then they stepped back into rain which felt like blessing. Their fingers laced while they walked down the path, not hiding from anyone who might see. Let them see, Neema thought, and let the hills remember. The microfinance office was a single room with a painted sign and a clerk who wore bright lipstick that dared bad luck to try her. She listened to them explain, tapping her pen on a form. "You are young," she said finally, not skeptically but as an inventory item. "Young is a risk and a resource. You will need a guarantor, a small one. Not land. A promise with skin on it." They shared a glance. Mama would sign, Juma's aunt would witness. The clerk tilted her head. "And show me that your coffee tastes like a future, not just a drink." They took her challenge literally. That night, under Mama's amused supervision, they roasted 3 small batches in a pan, stirring with wooden spoons until the beans cracked and shed papery chaff like tired secrets. The kitchen smelled like thunder turned sweet. Neema laughed as smoke painted the ceiling another shade of memory. Juma tasted with a seriousness that made her want to kiss him and listen to him in equal measure. "This one, berries," he said. "This one, dark chocolate if we don't scorch it. This one, like the morning after rain." Mama sipped and nodded, eyes twinkling. "The hills talk," she said. "You two translate." They brought the clerk a cup the next day, the beans ground by hand, the water poured slow. The clerk sipped, closed her eyes and smiled a small, victorious smile. "I will not say yes yet," she said, "but I will say maybe loudly." Papers moved, stamps thumped. Hope shifted from sky dream to desk weight. They walked out grinning, not because anything was guaranteed, but because possibility had finally learned their names. In the afternoon, they met under a jacaranda that had wandered off from someone's garden and decided to shade the footpath. Purple flowers freckled the packed earth like spilled paint. They practiced their pitch for the co-op manager, trading lines with the playful precision of 2 actors doing a love scene disguised as a business plan. When Juma stumbled, Neema corrected him by placing a finger against his lips. The touch was light but electric. The silence that followed was louder than the nearby boda boda sputter. His hand rose to her wrist, thumb tracing the place where pulse meets skin. They stood like that a long moment, a small ceremony with no witnesses unless you counted the tree, which always did. That evening they didn't find an empty shed or a convenient patch of privacy. The village was awake and loud, the kind of night when everyone borrowed everyone's voice. Instead, they walked to the ridge where the land rolled toward Kilimanjaro's distant shoulder. They sat close, letting their hips speak in presses and shifts. "If the land goes," Juma said quietly, "I don't know how to be myself somewhere flat." Neema took his face in both hands, guiding his eyes to hers. "You are not your father's acre," she said. "You are a map of mornings. You will carry the slope inside you even if papers steal it." He didn't answer with words. He kissed her palms, then her mouth, then the line of her jaw, each touch a vow. She kissed back, slow and sure, an amen to his vows. The wind pressed around them like a keeper of secrets. They parted with laughter that didn't fully erase the ache but softened it. At home, Neema lay on her mat, replaying the feel of his mouth, the soft strength of his hands, the way desire had been a river they learned to steer rather than a flood to fear. Nothing they did would embarrass the night. Nothing would betray themselves. She thought of futures that tasted like their best roast, bright at first, then deep, then sweet long after the cup was empty. The co-op manager wore glasses that made him look perpetually unimpressed. He listened anyway. Neema and Juma stood shoulder to shoulder, their rehearsed cadence settling into something truer. They explained small batch roasting, local branding, weekend tastings at the bus stand for travelers headed to Arusha. They offered margins, they offered sweat. When they finished, the manager tapped his pen. "Youth is good for lifting sacks and chasing dreams," he said. "Both get heavy. Start with 10 kilos of rejects. If you can turn them to money in a week, I'll talk more." He signed a slip. It felt like a truce with the future. Word of their little venture traveled faster than they did. Some of it arrived as encouragement, some as envy, some as jokes that pretended not to admire them. Baba didn't joke. He held the microfinance forms and read the clauses, lips moving. "If you fail, they come for something," he said. "Not land but something." "Us," Juma said. "They come for us to show up and pay." "Which we will." Baba studied his son's face, and for a moment Juma saw a version of the man before the debts bent his spine, young, in love with the same hills. "Go then," Baba said. "Bring back the kind of money that quiets a man's doubt." They roasted until the walls learned new shades of smoke. They laughed, they coughed, they kissed between batches with hands that smelled like caramel and char. On Saturday they set up at the bus stand with a borrowed table, a hand-painted sign, and cups lined like eager mouths. The first hour was slow, a trickle of curiosity in a river of indifference. Then a tourist guide with a bright shirt and a brighter smile took a cup, closed his eyes, and performed an appreciation so theatrical it wrung laughter from the crowd. People gathered. Neema poured and told the story of the hills. Juma ground more beans, his forearms a display of quiet power. They sold out before noon. The manager's slip turned into a promise of 20 kilos and a handshake that felt like a small or on a big lake. But paper storms roll in strange directions. On Sunday evening, a man from the town office came with his own documents, an overdue tax the family had forgotten, a fee that had doubled like gossip. The amount wasn't ruinous alone, but it stacked on the pile like a final straw that wanted to call itself a beam. Baba's face fell into shadow. Aunties began a chorus of "I told you so," that no one wanted to hear but everyone heard. "We can cover this," Juma said, looking at Neema with a silent question. She nodded before he asked. They counted their profit, added the loan, added bravery as a line item. Later, in the quiet post-storm air, they walked to the river's edge. Fireflies drifted low, testing their lamps against starlight. They took off their shoes and let the water numb their toes. The brush of ankle to ankle sent a flare up Neema's thigh that had nothing to do with cold. Juma pulled her onto the river rock. They sat knee to knee, forehead to forehead, the night holding them like a bowl. "I want us," he said, "not to borrow our time between ledgers. To make a room where the only math is the counting of your breaths." She smiled. "Then count." He did, softly, cheek against her temple, lips grazing skin on the odd numbers. By the time he reached 50, both of them were laughing, and the laughter moved like cloth slipping, like permission. They lay back, not to sleep but to memorize the ceiling of sky. Their kisses returned, slower and deeper than the river. They explored with patience and play, with murmurs that promised more when more could be given, with a tenderness that bound them tighter than any paper could. When they finally sat up, the moon had traded places with a cloud. "We will keep what is ours," Neema said, squeezing his hand. "Even if we must invent new ways to keep it." He kissed the base of her thumb. even if we must invent ourselves. The hills turned a hotter green. Pickers moved in bands, singing call-and response that kept wrists nimble and spines from complaint. Neema and Juma split their days, mornings on the slopes, afternoons roasting, evenings studying with lids heavy. Their little brand found a name, Asubuhi Hearts. A cousin drew a label that made the cherries look like two halves leaning together. They stuck it to brown bags with a glue that refused to respect humidity. It didn't matter. People remembered the taste and the smiles. Some came for the coffee and discovered the story. Others came for the story and discovered how the cup could hold a hill. Heat pressed everything thinner, including patience. On a particularly breathless afternoon, Neema and Juma took refuge in the drying shed where parchment coffee spread like pale river stones. The air inside was a furnace of fragrance. "If we stay, we'll roast with the beans," Neema said, cheeks flushed. "We could leave," Juma offered, but neither moved. Sweat gathered between Neema's shoulder blades. She felt a flush rise where his gaze met her skin. He reached to tuck a curl behind her ear. His fingers didn't hurry away. "You're beautiful when you complain," he said, grinning. She kissed him to shut him up and to hear the soft sound his surprise made. The kiss stretched, thick with heat and the rasp of breath. They pressed into shadow behind stacked sacks. The world narrowed to touch and scent and the grammar of wanting. Juma's hands asked again, kneading the air beside her waist before resting there, respectful but insistent about their desire to belong. Neema's hands learned the planes of his back, the way muscle answered palm. They moved together in a rhythm that felt older than the terrace walls, careful tides rising and receding, teasing the line they kept with intention and returning to it with choice. The heat made every brush of fabric a confession. When they finally broke apart, chest heaving, Neema laughed and wiped sweat from his lip with her thumb, then put the thumb to her own mouth as a silent toast. Outside, thunder rolled an empty threat. Inside they counted inventory and hopes. "If we hit 200 bags this month," Juma said, "we can meet the tax, the calf medicine, the school fees and still have enough to sneeze at the word sale." "Sneeze loudly," Neema said, bumping his hip with hers. But the numbers were tight. One bad market day, one broken roaster, one rumor turned to panic could tilt the balance. They didn't say it aloud. Instead that night they walked the long way home, hands slow swinging, discussing exams and music and whether the new teacher's mustache was a bird nesting or a life choice. At Neema's gate, they paused in the blue hour when the sky holds its breath before surrendering to dark. "Stay a minute," she said, meaning stay longer than a minute. Mama was at an aunt's. The house knew how to keep quiet when asked. In Neema's small room, the curtains stirred with a faithful wind. They sat on the edge of the bed, knees touching, laughter becoming whispers, whispers becoming a hush too full to bear alone. Their kisses began soft, deepened, returned to soft like a circle that didn't need corners. Shirts wrinkled, dignity loosened, care remained. They held themselves against each other until the ache quieted into warmth. When they parted, their eyes shone with the kind of secret that strengthens rather than hides. They ended the night at the doorway. Juma traced the frame with a knuckle, then Neema's jaw, then the air between them as if signing something into existence. "We will keep this," he said. She nodded. "We will keep the hills too, or we will learn to carry them inside our cups." He laughed, kissed her forehead, and stepped into the evening, which accepted him as if he were one of its own lamps. The morning market smelled like mango peels and diesel. Neema stacked their brown bags of Asubuhi hearts on a borrowed crate while Juma strung a twine banner between two poles. The letters wobbled, charming in their imperfection. The first customers were neighbors who had watched them grow up. The next wave were strangers following the scent. The third, the difficult kind, people who taste with their eyes and judge with their wallets. Neema met them with a smile that didn't fear arithmetic. Juma brewed a small pot and poured tastes into paper cups like invitations to a feast. By noon the sun hit hard. A boy with a drum circled their stall, beating a rhythm that made the crowd sway. An auntie announced for the fun of it that this coffee cured heartache. A farmer joked back that his heartache was his goat, and did the coffee have a rope? Laughter greased the day. They sold steadily, the stack of bills in their tin fattening like good news. Every time Neema's hand brushed Juma's when they made change, a tiny current jumped. It steadied her more than the coins. Then a shadow fell, literal from a cloud, figurative from a man in a clean shirt with a clipboard. He represented a buyer who wanted to talk to Juma's father about options. The word wore cologne. Neema felt the air tighten. "We have a plan," she said evenly. The man nodded in the way of people who nod to pass time until their turn. "Plans are good," he said. "But cash is clean. A sale could clear the family name and plant you both in town, where dreams grow faster. He left a card that felt heavier than paper. The crowd's chatter returned, but the music of it now had a lower note. That evening, under a shy moon, Juma and Neema carried their day's earnings to Baba. The tin clicked like a happy heart. Baba counted, nodded, but worry hovered like a hawk. "A man came," he said, holding the card at its edge. "Says the hills can be turned into something that doesn't depend on rain. A resort path, a view taxed properly. The bank likes the sound of that English." Juma's jaw tightened. "The bank doesn't wake before dawn to pick cherries," he said. "The bank doesn't bleed on thorns." Baba looked up, tired and loving. "The bank doesn't have a son," he murmured, "but I do." They didn't fight. They breathed. Neema suggested they invite the man to taste their coffee before talking numbers. "If he understands flavor, maybe he'll understand value beyond a surveyor's map," she said. Baba agreed to listen. They left the house with shoulders squared and hands hungry for each other. The dark road made them bolder. They cut behind a row of banana plants, found the short path to the shed where burlap and memory lived together. The lamp's flame vibrated at first, then steadied as if warming to the scene. Their kisses arrived unannounced, as certain as evening birds. The day had sharpened them, the night softened them. Together they found a pulse that turned both edges into music. Juma's hands learned the curve of Neema's back as if memorizing a poem he wanted to recite perfectly later. Neema's fingers traced the line of his neck and rested at his collarbone, feeling the steady reminder that he was here, alive, stubborn, hers. When their breathing grew fierce, they paused. When it calmed, they explored again, respectful to the line they kept and grateful for the closeness within it. Heat rose, yes, but so did care, a blanket they pulled over every choice. They spoke between kisses the way weary travelers speak between gulps of water. "I will not let them redraw us on a town map," Juma said. "We choose our scale." Neema smiled into his mouth. "Then we grow big enough to be unbuyable." He laughed, the sound vibrating through her. Outside, a dog barked exactly once as if agreeing. Inside, the future shifted from threat to dare. Before they left, Neema loosened the twine in Juma's banner and retied it with a cleaner knot. "Hold," she whispered, to rope and to him and to the hills. He watched her hands, slow and sure. "You make things stay," he said, kissing her forehead. She kissed his palm in return, right where his lifeline ran, as if to lengthen it. The man with the clipboard returned with a partner whose smile arrived before he did. They set up at Juma's homestead like salesmen at a traveling show, brochures unfolding with aerial photos and tidy rectangles. "We're not thieves," the smiling one said. "We're offering relief. Your family could keep a portion. We help with paperwork, we absorb risk." He said risk the way some men say rain, as if it simply happens. Neema brewed coffee without being asked. The pot sang, the cups lined up. She poured for the partners first. Respect is a door that sometimes opens the other way. They sipped. The smiling man's eyelids fluttered. "You make this," he said, genuinely impressed. Juma nodded. "From these hills." The clipboard man cleared his throat, conscious of losing ground to flavor. "And yet," he said, "the very hills that give this taste could finance your next 10 years. Imagine scaling what you've built, but without leaning on your father's back." Baba listened. He asked adult questions. Interest rates, timelines, hidden fees that wear friendly hats. Juma parried with a young man's precision. Projected cash flows, the co-op's expanded order, the microloan terms. Neema watched the exchange like a tennis match where love is not the same as zero. When the men left, they took nothing but the taste of good coffee and a promise to return with a formal offer. The air felt used. In the hush after, Neema took Baba's hand. "Your son's plan has legs," she said. "Two for many." Baba looked at their linked fingers and released a breath that had been held for months. "I married your plan when you were little," he said softly to Juma. "It wore muddy shoes and refused to come inside. Now it wears a clean shirt and quotes numbers at me. I'm proud. I'm also scared." He folded the card into the microloan paper, as if letting two kinds of futures negotiate in the dark. The next day swelled with work. Their brand traveled to a lodge in Moshi. A teacher ordered bags for a fundraiser. A cousin set up an account to take payments by phone. In the night, fatigue slid into the space where worry would otherwise squat. They found joy in small rituals. A shared orange by the roadside. A game where they named each star for a person who had said yes to them. A kiss traded for every empty sack filled. Desire, too, became ritual, never rushed, always chosen, like prayer said with both humor and reverence. One late afternoon, after a delivery, they climbed to a secret ledge halfway up the slope. From there, The village looked like a handful of beads spilled by a careless hand. Wind shook the coffee leaves into applause. Juma unrolled a scrap of cloth and produced a surprise, a battered second-hand camera. "For the brand," he said, a little shy. "And for us. Proof that we were here, not just a story the hills tell later." Neema laughed and struck a pose so solemn it became ridiculous. He clicked the shutter. The sound was tiny but satisfying. Then he lowered the camera and framed her with his hands instead. "This is better," he murmured. The kiss that followed tasted like orange and ambition. They moved with the ease of people who had learned each other's yes and pauses. When the ledge demanded respect, they gave it. When the wind tried to steal words, they replaced them with touch. The camera lay forgotten, but the moment still developed between them, vivid and permanent. Before descending, they took a real photo. Cheeks flushed, hair wild, eyes lit with a kind of trouble no ledger can punish. Exams arrived like an uninvited aunt. Loud, unavoidable, bearing gifts you didn't ask for. Study groups formed and dissolved. Chalk dust colonized everyone's cuticles. Neema and Juma took turns quizzing each other on agronomy, chemistry, and the math that futures require. Between formulas, they traded sips of lukewarm kahawa and smiles hot enough to wake the dead. Their teacher, a quiet man with a comically fierce mustache, announced that the top 2 students would receive a small grant to pursue a community project. The class grumbled. The hills listened with interest. At home, the tension tightrope tightened. The resort men returned with an offer that glittered like a fish in sun. It would wipe the ledger clean, leave a strip of land, fund a move to town. It came with clauses that translated to, "You lose mornings but you gain a roof that doesn't leak." Baba asked for time. Time shrugged. Interest ticked forward like a metronome that doesn't care about the song. Neema proposed a showcase night at the co-op. A tasting, a live roast, a short talk about soil health and terroir to make the word sound like family, not French. They rehearsed by the river. Juma spoke about the way volcanic ash and slope aspect conspire to make fruit sing in the cup. Neema spoke about belonging, about how a place gets inside you and comes back out as something you can share without losing it. Their words braided like strands of one rope. When they finished, the breeze carried applause from no one and everyone. The night of the showcase, the drying yard transformed. Strings of bulbs drew a canopy of low stars. Curious neighbors rubbed shoulders with serious buyers. The resort men lurked at the back, polite vultures in crisp shirts. Neema roasted a small pan batch, the beans cracking like fireflies popping. Juma brewed and poured. The first sip led to a second. The second led to questions that mattered, about price and consistency and whether they could deliver 30 kilos a month. "We can," Juma said, confidence sitting squarely in his voice. The co-op manager, glasses glinting, nodded as if he had always believed. Afterward, a woman in a linen dress approached, someone with a magazine label stitched to her tote. She loved their story, she loved their cup. Would they be willing to be profiled? Neema and Juma agreed with the restraint of people who want to shout. Meanwhile, Baba stood at the edge of the crowd, holding the resort offer in his pocket like a stone that refuses to warm. He watched his son speak, watched Neema's easy authority, watched the way buyers' faces tilted toward possibility. Something in him leaned back from the cliff. When the yard emptied, the string bulbs hummed to themselves. Neema and Juma slipped away to the far corner where sacks made a temporary wall. The applause echo still shivered in their bones, so did relief. They kissed the way people do who have hauled a heavy load together and set it down without breaking anything. There was laughter in it and a tremble that belonged to more than tiredness. Hands traveled, not to conquer but to thank. Over shoulders, along arms, to the small of the back where stress hides. For a while the world was just breath, heartbeat, and the close smell of coffee and skin. When they parted, it was because joy had made them gentle again. On the walk home they met the rope in the middle. "If your father says yes to them," Neema said, "I will still love you at sea level, I swear." Juma nodded, eyes on the dark slope that had raised him. "If he says no and we fail," he replied, "I will still love you in debt." They touched foreheads, that quiet sacrament they had invented. Then they said nothing, which in their language meant everything. The magazine woman moved faster than gossip. Within a week, a small feature appeared online with photos that made the hills look like a secret paradise and Neema and Juma look like the kind of future that remembers the past. Orders pinged a borrowed phone until the battery sighed. The co-op manager stopped pretending to be unimpressed. Even the resort men adjusted their approach, now referring to partnership. Language is a river, money tilts its banks. Exams ended. Students howled their freedom to the sky. Neema and Juma didn't party. They stacked bags and balanced books, and when fatigue threatened to sink them, they wrote letters to each other they never mailed. Neema's letters tolled like bells, clear, warm, grounding. She wrote about the first time she noticed the way he listened to water before crossing it, about the kindness in his wrists when he poured for elders, about the thrill that lived where his laughter began. Juma's letters unfolded like maps, detailed, precise, with secret paths only she would know. He wrote about the way she turned worry into work, about how her eyes sharpened when she solved a problem, about the burn in his chest when her hand found his in a crowd. One evening they sat on the school's roof, a place with its own gravity. The letters lay between them, unsealed, not for hiding but for ceremony. They read aloud in turns, voices low, pausing to breathe or to kiss a phrase into skin. Neither letter mentioned the word sex. Both were full of hunger, holy and human. Their bodies understood the edit. They stretched out side by side, fingers interlaced across the space between ribs. The sky went deep and then deeper. They stayed until the cold urged them down. At home, Baba placed the resort contract on the mat. They improved the terms, he said, tapping a clause with his finger. Still a sale. A clean cut. But they leave the upper terraces for our use for 5 years. After that, another talk. He looked older and younger at once. A man is allowed to change his mind for the sake of his children, he added softly. Juma knelt, not as a plea but as a son. Baba, he said, I want to fight a fight I can tell my children about. Not against you. With you. Against the kind of saving that steals. They did not decide that night. Instead, they sat late, the lamp burning its small brave circle. Neema joined, her presence a stitch that kept the fabric from tearing. They listed numbers, they weighed weather, they named risks like relatives. Some loved, some tolerated. When the wick finally drowned in its own wax, their choice remained a shape in the dark, not yet carved, but its edges known by touch. Back in her room, Neema unfolded Juma's letter again and pressed it to her chest. Desire flared, not as a rush but as a tide. She let it rise and fall, let it teach her that wanting didn't have to be a cliff. Somewhere across the lane, Juma did the same with her letter. If paper could blush, both pages would have glowed. Morning arrived with the authority of a school bell. Baba had asked the resort men to return at dusk. He had asked the co-op manager to come too. Let the witnesses be people who know the smell of soil and the sound of a promise, he said. Juma and Neema worked like people who needed their bodies to occupy the hours while their minds paced. They picked cherries until their fingers reddened. They roasted until the pan sang a restless song. They kissed when the world looked away, brief and fierce, as if feeding a small flame they couldn't afford to let go out. In the late afternoon, clouds draped themselves over the ridge. A wind came with opinions. Neema braided her hair with a ribbon Juma had given her months ago. Juma changed his shirt twice and still felt too young. They met by the jacaranda that had adopted the path. We go in like this, Neema said, slipping her hand into his. Not begging, not boasting. Offering what we are. He nodded. Which is two people who refuse to be priced. The yard filled quietly. The resort men arrived in a vehicle that looked like a promise of air conditioning. The co-op manager came on foot, glasses polished. Aunties and uncles drifted to the edge, pretending to pass by as witnesses arranged themselves. Baba began, voice steady. He thanked everyone. He named his fear without shame. He named his son's work without sting. Then he asked the men to speak their offer aloud, line by line, like a prayer everyone should hear before saying amen. They did. The numbers were real. So were the costs. When they finished, the co-op manager cleared his throat. I do not own this land, he said, and I will not tell a man how to feed his family. I will say only that these two have turned 10 kilos into a story that attracts money the way ripe cherries attract eyes. If they can do 30 kilos a month, I will commit to buying at a premium for a year. Put that in your math. Murmurs rippled. The resort men adjusted their smiles. Baba listened. Silence gathered like rain about to begin. Juma felt Neema's thumb move on the back of his hand. 1, 2, 3 strokes, their code for breathe. He did. Baba, he said, not to sway but to stand beside. If we sell, we teach the village that the hills are negotiable. If we fight and fail, we teach them that failure can be decent. I would rather be decently poor than richly gone. Neema spoke next, clear as a bell. I will work, she said. Not as a daughter-in-law preparing to inherit a problem, but as a partner who has already inherited love. Let the land hear me say it. Baba's eyes shone. He looked at the terraces, each a line his father and his father's father had drawn with stubborn hands. He looked at the resort men who were not villains, only a different kind of solution. He looked at the co-op manager who had never smiled so plainly. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft and immovable. "We will not sell," he said. "Not this year. Not while youth stands ready." The decision landed like rain that had been promised and finally kept. Relief rushed the yard. The resort men were gracious even in defeat. They left a door open with real politeness. The aunties clicked tongues in approval and dispersed. The uncles pretended they had known all along. The co-op manager shook Juma's hand, then Neema's, and for once his glasses reflected nothing but pride. Baba hugged his son with both arms and did not hurry to let go. That night, before sleep could enter the house, Neema and Juma climbed to their ledge. The sky was a dark cloth pricked with needles of light. They spoke very little. Every sentence felt too small next to what had happened. Instead, they let their bodies say gratitude the way bodies know how when words are too stiff. With closeness that is careful and full, with kisses that carry both heat and thanks, with hands that remember to ask and to answer. They stayed until the chill argued them down the path. At Neema's gate they lingered. "Tomorrow we wake and pick," she said, smiling at the ordinary heroism of it. "Tomorrow we roast," he echoed, "and study and count and hold on." He traced her jaw with the back of his fingers, the gesture slow enough to write the date on her skin. She kissed his wrist where the pulse beat, sealing the calendar in blood. When they finally parted, the hills seemed to exhale, and even the stars looked a little brighter for having watched two young people choose a future that demanded everything and promised enough. After Baba's decision, the hills themselves seemed lighter. The wind moved through the leaves like applause. Pickers greeted Neema and Juma with a respect that hadn't been there before, not just as children of the slope but as its defenders. Every cherry plucked felt like a thank you, every basket filled like proof that the land had chosen wisely. Orders stacked faster than they could roast. The co-op delivered 20 kilos, then 30, testing their limits. Neema's mother offered to help with labeling. Cousins showed up with laughter and willing hands. Even Baba appeared in the drying yard one morning, adjusting a sack so the beans wouldn't mold. He didn't say a word, but his silence carried the weight of agreement. At school, results arrived. Neema and Juma had topped their class. The teacher with the fierce mustache presented them with the grant for their community project. "Coffee is your subject," he said. "But your true exam is life." They bowed, fighting smiles. The project funds would allow them to buy a second-hand roaster. No more pans blackened over firewood. It felt like a door creaking open to a bigger room. That evening they climbed to their ledge again. Kilimanjaro glowed faintly under moonlight, like a guardian wrapped in mist. Neema leaned against Juma, the air alive between them. "We're becoming something," she whispered. "Not just two people kissing behind sacks. We're becoming a story others repeat." He smiled, pressing his cheek to her hair. "Then let's tell it right." Their lips met, carrying the kind of depth that no newspaper profile could capture. Their hands traveled carefully, reverently, as if reading scripture they'd written together. Heat rose, but so did restraint, the balance they had mastered. They stayed until the stars thinned, hearts steady, bodies close, futures interwoven. News of their success reached further than expected. A cafe in Dar es Salaam asked for samples. A lodge near Ngorongoro inquired about direct supply. Juma and Neema barely had time to breathe between studies, roasting, and shipments. Exhaustion pressed hard, but pride carried them. "This is the kind of tired I prayed for," Neema said, collapsing on a sack after a long day. Juma laughed and pulled her into his lap, holding her like the rest she deserved. But success attracts shadows. A cousin of the resort men visited Baba with a softer offer. Partial lease, no sale, just sharing the load. He dangled words like college tuition and modern equipment. Baba was tempted. Who wouldn't be? When Neema overheard, her chest tightened. "They don't want to help," she told Juma later. "They want a foothold." He nodded grimly. "Then we must climb higher before they reach us." The pressure cracked one evening. After delivering to town, they missed the last bus and walked the long road home. The stars glowed, the air thick with damp earth. Tiredness peeled away their defenses. They stopped by a roadside tree, dropping their bags with a sigh. Neema leaned into Juma's chest, his heartbeat steady against her cheek. His arms wrapped around her, slow, sure, drawing her closer. Their kisses came hungry, not from lust alone but from the ache of carrying too much weight. They pressed together, heat rising, hands exploring with urgency. But even in urgency, care remained. They slowed, choosing not to cross the line that waited. Instead, they found solace in the closeness itself. Breath against breath, chest against chest, the kind of intimacy that says, "We survive because we have each other." When they finally pulled away, the night itself seemed to sigh. The village prepared for the annual harvest festival, a night of drums, lanterns and dancing under skies lit by fireflies. For once, Neema and Juma had no bags to carry, no orders to fill. They dressed simply, Neema in a flowing kitenge patterned with coffee branches, Juma in a crisp white shirt that made him look older, sharper. When they met at the festival ground, the crowd parted as if to announce them. They laughed at the attention but didn't let go of each other's hands. Drums rolled like thunder dressed in joy. They danced, at first shyly, then with abandon, their bodies moving in sync as if they had rehearsed in secret. Sweat beaded on their foreheads, but it wasn't just from dancing, it was from the electricity between them. Every spin, every brush of arm against arm, stoked the flame. When the crowd grew loud, they slipped away to the riverbank, where lanterns floated like stars fallen to water. There, under the gaze of 100 fireflies, they sat close, knees touching. Juma dipped his fingers in the river and traced wet lines along Neema's arm. She shivered, leaning closer, kissing him until laughter spilled from both their mouths. The intimacy wasn't in what they removed but in what they revealed. Longing, gratitude, a hunger for a future they were building brick by brick. They lay back on the grass, staring at the floating lights. "If one goes out, I'll light it again," Juma whispered. Neema turned and kissed him deeply, answering without words. The night wrapped them gently, like a blanket woven by ancestors. Not every day glowed. One morning the roaster cracked under strain, beans burning into bitter charcoal. Orders backed up, customers complained. Juma cursed under his breath, Neema fought tears. Stress dug its claws in. They snapped at each other, small arguments about timing, about who should have noticed the roaster's weakness. That night they didn't meet at the ledge. Each went home heavy. But love bends before it breaks. The next day, Juma came to Neema's gate, holding a sack of beans and an apology. "We can roast by pan again slowly like before," he said. Neema smiled through tears, pulling him into an embrace. Slow doesn't mean failure. It means care. They roasted side by side, smoke stinging their eyes until laughter returned. Later, under the stars, they kissed away the residue of stress. Their hands lingered, soothing more than stirring, touching in ways that healed rather than ignited. Passion was still there, but tonight it bowed to tenderness. In that tenderness, they rediscovered why the fight was worth it. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon, literal ones. The rains came late, threatening yields. But Neema and Juma had already weathered a storm between themselves. They knew now that their bond wasn't fragile. It could bend. It could hold. And that knowledge was a fire stronger than any drought. The rains finally came, baptizing the hills in silver. The beans fattened, the leaves gleamed, the air smelled alive again. Neema and Juma stood on their ledge, watching the water run in rivulets down the terraces. Their baskets leaned empty against a tree, but their hands were full of each other. They had survived debts, temptations, storms, and offers that glittered like false coins. Their brand was still small, but it was real. Their love was still young, but it was fierce. The hills had tested them and found them worthy. "When I taste our coffee," Juma said softly, "I taste us. Strong, a little sweet, sometimes bitter, but always alive." Neema laughed, kissing him with rain dripping between them. "Then let's keep brewing." Their kiss deepened, heat battling the chill of rain. Their hands explored slowly, reverently, as if they had all the time in the world. The storm around them became music, the rush of water, the drum of drops on leaves, the whisper of wind. They leaned into each other, not to escape the storm, but to stand taller inside it. The intimacy wasn't in how far they went, but in how completely they gave themselves in the moment, soaked, shivering, and unafraid. When they finally pulled apart, laughter bubbled up. They raised their faces to the sky, mouths open to catch the rain. Tomorrow there would be more work, more challenges, more ledgers. But tonight, the hills were theirs, the future was theirs, and love, steady, burning, unbuyable, was theirs.